Hey, y'all. Take a second and think. What are you doing in between the days of April 17th and the 21st? Well, I have a suggestion for what you should be doing. Nash Vegas, baby. My friend Lindsay Conroy from episode 4 is hosting her first retreat in Nashville, Tennessee. So it's going to be a fun-filled weekend with a yoga triathlon, sound workshops, meditation, karaoke, live music, whiskey tastings, fly fishing, hikes, and a rooftop yoga party. Spend time immersed in the buzz of Music City, experiencing a variety of musical performances from genres and artists, as well as getting away from the bustle into nature. And all of this at a discounted price of $650. That's right, all expenses paid. Food, lodging, and entertainment, $650 for 4 of some of your best days anywhere in Nashville. For more details on this and other retreats, as well as contact info, check out edcenturesyoga.com. That is edcentures with a Z-E-N, Zen in the middle of it. And don't be shy to reach out to Lindsay by email. She's really nice. All right. Hello, everybody. This is a very cool episode. I had a chance to sit down with Lara Falberg, who is a teacher at Yoga on High, which is a super dope yoga studio in Columbus, Ohio. Not that I'm biased, as well as a novelist, as well as a motivational speaker. Lara also runs iworkbarefoot.com. It's a resource for yoga teachers where they could find sequences, cues, and themes for their classes. And she is a prolific blogger for Yogi Approved and healinglifestyles.com. I met Lara at Yoga on High, and there's a definite cult of Lara that is going around that studio, and I've been pulled into it. Our conversation was really cool, all over the place. We talked about writing in the voice of a character in fiction, writing because you have something to say and you need a place to say it, when to care what other people say, when not to care what other people say, and the ever ongoing process of refinement. I was lucky to have her on the show. Check it out. A lovely interview with Lara Falberg. Usually if I'm preparing more, I become less nervous for these interviews. But the more that I prepared and researched for yours, the more nervous I became because I'm like, oh, wow, I really don't deserve to have somebody as like far along as Lara on the show.
Knock it off.
No, for real.
Thank you. I don't know
why
you
it's
feel
like
that
written
way.
Novels and multiple websites, gives motivational speaking workshops. The list goes on. You teach at OSU.
Yeah, I teach to the athletic department, and I've worked with a bunch of the sports teams at Ohio State.
Yeah, so that's a really long resume.
Well,
that's
I'm
like the
not
rule-breaking, like 2-page resume.
I've been on this planet for 47 years, so it gives you time to do some stuff. But I just have one website. It's called I Work Barefoot. It's a yoga teacher resource website, and I've just written one novel.
Just one novel.
Just one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, which actually I wanted to start there because on top of being just a very impressive person, in my opinion, you don't have to refute that, but yeah, you've written a full novel fiction called Yoga Train, and you could explain real quick what that's about.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's about a group of people who go through a yoga teacher training program together. And I had just moved back to Columbus, Ohio from Atlanta when I started it. So I set it in Columbus.
Yeah. So I was flipping through that before the interview, and it was cool to see like Mission Coffee and and Hocking Hills and some of these places that are local to the area pop up in there. But what I wanted to ask you about was my favorite quote from what I've read so far was, fuck her. She has the time for pedicures and uncomfortable shoes, which is by the character Devin about her sister, Georgia. I was like, that doesn't sound like Lara's voice.
Hopefully it's not my voice.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the crazy part about trying to write fiction. And I had absolutely no idea what I was doing when I started. And it's probably pretty evident I had no idea what I was doing when you read the novel.
No, I'm falling into it.
Oh, good. I appreciate that. But you have to write characters and they have to be distinctive, and they certainly can't all sound like you. So you put a little bit of yourself, I'm sure, into everything that you write, but you draw on, incessant amounts of inspiration all around you from people and characters and movies and books and just inventions in your head, right?
For real. Yeah. Could you give me an example of that, at least from the book?
Yeah. Have you gotten to the character Teak yet?
I have not.
Okay. So in the novel, Devin is the protagonist, and she winds up embarking on a teacher training program. And even though your teacher training program, Nate, is a pretty large group. How many people are in your group?
Probably about 40.
40. My teacher training program was capped at 18. They didn't take more than 18. This was also a while back when things were a little bit different. And so in the book, I capped it at 12 just because I could not write more characters. So Teak
That's a very pragmatic decision.
Yeah. I'm like, this is all I got. Plus, a lot of people to keep track of, and you got to respect your audience. You certainly couldn't write 40 characters. But there's 12 characters, and there's some characters that are more main within that 12 than others. And Teak is one of the main characters, and she really serves as like the mother figure for Devin, and which Devin desperately needs because her mother died when she was young. And she's very much based on one of my closest friends in the world who lives in Atlanta. And there was a lot of my friend Trina in that character to draw on, with her blessing, of course. So that's an example of like drawing on people that are just kind of larger than life to you, and finding a way to infuse them. And Devin has a lot of me in her, unfortunately, from when I was a young woman, drawing back on who I used to be, and hopefully helping her move in the direction of who I'd like to see her become.
Wow. That's wild to me, because you seem like the most happy, like generous, like I'll stop and talk with you for like 3 hours and give you my time, and like, thank you for showing up. This is amazing.
My pleasure.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking me.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I can't see the connection with who you are as you appear to me today. With Devin, like,
well, thank God, because I really was a lot like Devin in my early 30s, like right when I started taking yoga. Very unhappy, very negative, full of complaint. Didn't ever really consider gratitude in my life. Made not the greatest choices. I desperately needed a giant change, and that is what teacher training winded up being for me. Was just this huge, eye-opening experience of I don't have to be the person I am. I can actually change. I can actually see the world differently and then operate differently under different guiding principles that I didn't have the toolbox, and then this was like a whole new toolbox to me. So, whether I'd winded up teaching yoga or not, which I obviously did wind up doing, I feel like teacher training would have been, just this vehicle for change for me. And I think it is for everyone, at least on some level. And that was the impetus for the novel, was because after I went through teacher training, started teaching a few years in, started to notice the trend, how so many yoga students wind up going through teacher training. It's a pretty common decision to make, actually, for anyone who's a yoga lover. And so I started thinking like, wow, people are really interested in teacher training who love yoga. So I thought, why don't I write something that gives people the flavor of what going through a teacher training program is about, for those who are contemplating it and kind of want to know maybe a little bit about what they might be getting into, or for those also who have been through it to sort of reminisce and connect to and relate to.
That's really cool. So did you try approaching giving somebody a flavor of what the experience was like, not through fiction? Or did this present itself as the idea?
I'd written a few articles before that were nonfiction, but I definitely wanted to fictionalize it. And I wanted to offer up like an ethical dilemma that people had to go through, and also highlight the fact that wherever we go, there we are, right? That's that famous quote, wherever you go, there you are. So there's all these people in teacher training, I think, figuring out, like I did, oh, I really need to make some changes. I really need some growth. But you still bring everything that you've got going on, all your baggage, all your experiences to the table. And then you have to decide what you keep and what you let go of, and new directions to go. Yeah,
that's a kind of cool thing about the whole 8-limb process. And especially if you're in teacher training, you're just being presented those ideas over and over again. Is it's not just realize what's going on, is do something about it.
Totally.
Yeah. So in your 30s, how involved with writing were you before your teacher training in your past life?
I used to work for the district attorney's office in Atlanta. It was DeKalb County. I worked there for 8 years as the victim advocate for the Crimes Against Children unit. So my life was very different.
Yeah, that's about the other end of the spectrum. Yeah,
it's about the other end of the spectrum. And it was as hard as it sounds. It was as difficult and challenging as it sounds. And when you hear horror story after horror story, day after day after day, it gets in you. It really does. And so I knew I needed a whole different path, even though that is such important work and I would never trade one day of that experience. I met Trina and other really amazing friends through that experience, but I knew I needed a change. So I temporarily went to go work for the Guardian ad litem's office as an investigator. And that was even harder. And so finally, after finishing teacher training, I got lucky where a couple just really lucrative gigs dropped into my lap. And I was able to make that leap to being a full-time yoga instructor at that time. And then did a couple other things on the side through various attorneys I worked with, like interviewed witnesses for them and did a little bit of counseling with people, like worked as a private counselor for a while as well too, but mostly just taught yoga. And it was one of the most important decisions I made in my life. And it definitely fostered the writing path for me.
So how did it foster the writing path?
I was thinking in ways I wasn't used to thinking, and I was surrounded by completely different people. And my days were so varied, and I was just constantly exposed to people. So when you work in an office, right, you're pretty much interacting with the same people every day. And yes, other people come in and out. We'd have one case, we'd finish one case, a new one would start. But primarily, you're interacting with the same people. When you're constantly meeting new people every single day, it's just this elixir for creativity because you're hearing ideas from all different areas of the city and people that you would never normally have met because you're not working in the same field with them. They're from all walks of life, all different backgrounds. So yeah.
That's so funny because when I showed up the first class that I took with you teaching and you introduced yourself and talked to me and I usually, I'll meet yoga teachers at the studios that I go to and we'll be on a first name basis or anything. But like we really got to know each other. And then I've gotten involved in some new things because of you and your recommendations, things like that. I was thinking about it. It's like, man, connecting with people like Lara does is really cool. And I was trying to put words to it. And it was like, yeah, she just kind of saw me. It was like, oh, a new character. What's going on here?
I wouldn't quite put it like that. But I think what it is, how do I say this without sounding like an asshole? Let me try, people. I'm genuinely interested in people. I like to know their stories. I like to know their background. I enjoy getting to know people.
Which is beautiful. Yeah.
I agree, but I have, I'm just inquisitive. So I enjoy hearing about people. And one of my big thrills and pleasures in life is to connect people with one another. So that's just kind of really what it boils down to. But I hear somebody say something and I think, oh my gosh, that just gave me the best idea. And I wouldn't have gotten that idea if I hadn't asked that person questions. So it's really very self-serving, bottom line.
Excellent. Yeah. Most of the nice, quote unquote, nice things that I do are pretty self-serving. It's like, oh, that's so great. You work with kids. Yeah. Only because I have to. What's probably an example of one really great inspiration that you got from somebody just kind of unexpectedly and randomly?
Oh man, that's a tough one. Gosh, there's just so many. Now my head is getting really cloudy with thoughts. Okay, there's a woman who comes to Yoga on High, which is where I teach, and Nate is in teacher training. And she'd been coming to my class for years, and I knew her name and knew she was from Columbus, but I had no idea what she did for a living. She was so humble and just always so warm and lovely. And then I come to find out that she's an emergency room doc. And the day I chose to ask her, hey, what do you do with your life? She told me, and then she just sort of teared up and broke down. Like she had literally just come off a shift and had a patient die. Wow. And so you don't know what's going on with people. And with this particular woman, I just thought and she's so good at just keeping it in and coming in. And she came in because she needed some healing, but I was especially glad that I chose that day to ask her because it allowed her the opportunity to release It allowed me the opportunity to understand the intensity that is her daily life and to be there for her in a moment where she just needed somebody to be there for her and hold that space for her. And our bond has been way stronger ever since that moment. We wouldn't have had it if I wouldn't have asked her that question that day. So you have to ask questions is my bottom line. You got to ask people questions. You got to ask about their life, not try to relate it back to yours, but just keep asking more and more questions. Let the focus be on them. It is really the only way I've ever learned jack shit in this world.
Huh. Wait, so this was an epiphany that you had probably in the last 8 years?
I don't know. I just know that I used to talk about myself a lot. And right now here I'm on your podcast talking about myself.
I know it's my job to bring it out of you. Let it all out.
But I think once you recognize the world gets a lot interesting, the less you're talking about you, all of a sudden this flood of ideas comes in, and it definitely helps if you have any desires to write of any sort or just create of any sort. You know, your mom's a painter. I know you're a musician, and whatever creative outlet you want to find, the more you listen, the more information you'll have to draw from.
Yeah. There's all sorts of quotes about improvisation in music and, listen more than you play, really, to figure out where things are going and where you should be going. Because things only happen when people are doing it together, really. That's really cool. And you said that the writing is something that kind of extended out of becoming more involved in yoga and having this new toolkit and this new perspective on your inner life. How did you find yourself writing?
I found that I had something I wanted to say. And when I was working at the district attorney's office, I mean, I said plenty, mostly gossip, which, is very poisonous, but that's sort of how
It's fun.
Unfortunately, it can feel that way sometimes. But then later, the aftermath is it doesn't feel very good.
Yeah.
To be focusing on the negatives. And I didn't really stretch my brain in any way before then. It never really occurred to me to go beyond what I was doing until I had to. Because when you're teaching yoga, it sounds all nice and lovely and gooey and maybe even the littlest bit glamorous, but there's a lot that goes into it. Developing a playlist, one that really fosters the class versus like, these are just songs I like and I'll throw them all together. And figuring out like a theme of class and why that even matters and how that's universal. So that's how it extends into writing, because when you write things that have a universal appeal, more and more people want to connect with it. And it's also totally okay to like have a niche, but as long as there is a universal appeal within that niche, people that really feel like, yes, I've had these thoughts too. Yes, I've had those same experiences happen to me. And that's not where I landed on it. Let me contemplate what you said, or no, I don't agree. I landed here and here's why. It just prompts discussions, and it helps people learn from one another.
That's very cool. Did you immediately resonate with the idea of themed classes?
Yeah, I
and
did.
Intentions immediately.
Yeah, because I loved them. My teachers in Atlanta all were absolute phenomenal storytellers. And those themes were what stayed with me. Yes, I learned cool, postures, and I learned interesting ways to utilize props. But it was more of the way that they told a story within the confines of a class environment that I spent the next day, 2 days, 3 days still really working with.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I'd never personally reacted to when I was involved in yoga. Yoga was always just, I'm moving and I'm in my own head and I can kind of get that, but don't like tell me to feel good and feel good in a certain way at the beginning of class. And that's what it's all about. No, I'm here to get a workout. But in the last couple of months, and especially now that I'm writing, I'm seeing a lot of, 8 limbs, yamas, niyamas, and these ideas in the blog post that I'm trying to write. And I'm like, oh, these are just kind of themes for yoga classes.
Yeah.
Expanded upon. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to be thinking about this in the context of a yoga class, as in how can I apply this idea? And maybe outside of a yoga class. I was very dense about that from the get-go with yoga.
Me too.
Yeah.
I think I shouldn't say all, some people walk in straight towards meditation and pranayama breath work. And maybe Nate and I should explain for the listeners what the yamas and the niyamas are.
Yes, good idea.
There's 8 limbs in the yoga path. And the yamas and the niyamas are the first and the second limbs. And to just as concisely as I can put it, they are the observances for life and also the constraints, things that we try not to do, such as like not being greedy and not being harmful. And then also being content and being truthful and, studying ourselves. So yamas, Y-A-M-A-S, niyamas, N-I-Y-A-M-A-S, in case anybody wants to look them up. They're this very cool toolbox. And when I was starting to get into yoga, my teachers always introduced those. And that was where something clicked for me and took yoga from the physical practice to something else. And I think that's why yoga is being done by like 37 million people in our country at this point, because people are finding that they are wanting and craving more than just moving their bodies thoughtlessly. They want to do it in conjunction with how is this helping things resonate within, and how is this helping me learn about myself and the world around me?
Thank you. I would have misspelled both of those. No. And no, that's actually really, I'm kind of finding out a kind of parallel to what I'm doing or I'm trying to do with this podcast is what are attitudes about practice and thoughts about practice that are going to be better for doing just about anything. And I'm like, oh, that's like a perfect example of trying to find these things that work in yoga in specific contexts and moving them to other things. Mm-hmm. And some of my good ideas, I'm like, oh man, I just kind of plagiarized that from yoga. So
yeah, and
put it on guitars.
And you know what? How cool is that? Like, you can call it plagiarism or you can call it inspiration. And it's pretty awesome. But I think one of the mistakes I have made and I continue to make is trying to force my opinions on other people. And I have to be really mindful and catch myself in those moments of insisting on the way I think that yoga could potentially benefit somebody. It's really not up to us. If somebody is very much responding to the asana practice and the physical movement and the other things are not yet or maybe ever resonating with them, they're taking great care of their bodies. And that's certainly going to give them a greater sense of stillness and peace and good enough. Like if we could offer up and introduce as many of these ideas as we can and then just be cool with people grabbing on to what works for them, I feel like we'll all be a lot happier. But I definitely find that I am unhappy and I suffer when I'm trying to impose an idea that somebody else is not connecting with. And then I have to recognize like, oh, that's my problem. That's not theirs.
Yeah, that you can't force these things.
Nor should we want to. It's not, I don't have any answers. I just know.
I don't know. That's pretty human to like want things to go your way.
I guess so, but we suffer because
it's not noble. It's just human.
Yeah. And we suffer over it. And so the Yoga Sutras teach us that the whole pursuit of suffering has to do with non-attachment. So if we can offer anything that we're doing with a sense of non-attachment, we'll suffer less. And gosh, it's incredibly difficult to pull off, but it's still a nice thing to be keeping in mind.
Could you tell me more about that? Maybe how non-attachment started playing into your life?
I wish it would have played into my life a hell of a lot sooner. I can tell you that. I wish it was a concept that I had ever even considered. Probably started when I read the book, The 4 Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. Have you read it?
No, I've been reading one of his other books, and I usually start 3 books and finish one of them.
Right.
So that's one of the other 2. But can you tell me about the 4 Agreements? Because I've heard other people mention the title. I don't really know anything about it.
Oh my gosh. I had just moved from Atlanta to Columbus and wasn't really working, was trying to rebuild my career here. And I was visiting my parents in Cincinnati and flipping through their gigantic library books and saw the 4 Agreements and opened it and literally canceled my plans that night with like high school friends because I couldn't put the book down. And it's these 4 very seemingly simple concepts that are so complex. So to quickly go through them, the first agreement is to be impeccable with your word, to be honest, to be truthful, to say what you really mean. First time I read this, I'm like, well, I do that. I'm impeccable with my word. And then the second agreement is to take nothing personally. And I realized right away, I'm like, ooh, that's one I'm not super stellar at. And the third one was to assume nothing. And I thought to myself, again, not so super good at that one. And then the fourth one is just to do your best. And then the more you really read them and get into them and start to bridge the gap between looking at those as concepts that you can't connect to and turning them into concepts that you need. things start to change. And I started to realize, wow, I'm rarely impeccable with my word. And yeah, I should take absolutely nothing personally. So now I take maybe 10% less personally than I once did. Like it's an incessant practice, just like yoga, just like playing guitar, just like everything. But that right there is what really hit me hard, was that
if it's at all important, 10% better is a lot.
Maybe, but that's been over the course of the last 9 years, so it's progress, not perfection. Right. But like, I don't even know where I would be right now without having come across those concepts, because it changed everything for me. And I remember I finished the book and I thought, oh my God, I'm doing everything wrong. And this is the best news I could possibly get, because I was struggling so hard and I couldn't understand. I didn't know where to begin. And that book was my beginning.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like every mistake is a little nugget of information on how to do better.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you have a book like that just sort of led you down a different pathway?
Thinking about this one, not nearly as inspiring, but probably Tim Ferriss' 4-Hour Workweek. Because I'd never thought about how to actually, with some control over my own path, like make conscious decisions on how I wanted my life to look like. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I agree. That was a great book. The only criticism I had of that book is it was so freaking long. I'm like, it took me 4 weeks to read this book.
Yeah, it's also a different Tim Ferriss. Like, you listen to him now and he's very mindful and has interesting conversations, very curious with people. And I feel like back during 4-Hour Workweek, he was trying to come off as, look how impressive I am.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I would be curious to hear him talk about his feelings on the book now. But I remember reading that too and thinking like, oh yeah, God, I really do waste a ton of my time. I could be so much more productive. And one of the things I remember getting from that book was he's like, you're going to argue with me. People are going to immediately say that's ridiculous. He said, but don't watch the news. If something important happens, somebody else will tell you. And I thought, he's right. And I still watch way too much of the news and still read far too many stories. But on those days where I don't, I feel much better.
Yeah. The way it works for me is I'm not watching the news, but I will see memes about it if it is news.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You still get that glimmering.
A little bit. Yeah. And still a lot of the time, I've also heard people say, if you don't hear about it at all, 5 months later, it wasn't news.
Well, that's definitely one way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, but for me, just having an idea of like, oh, I can make these decisions. Mm-hmm. I can actually decide to build something on my own and not be employed by somebody else. And
right.
Nobody told me I could do that.
I feel the same, Nate. I feel like, I guess that's what age does, right? We get concepts that you can't come across everything in a matter of 18, 19, 22 years. Like, it just takes time to get exposure to things. But I often do think like, what would life have been like if I just either hadn't gone to college or had chosen something totally different? Like, it's just never ending like that for all of us, which is why writing is so interesting, because you have to make these writing choices. You pick something. Like all of us, that's what we do. We pick something. We pick a career. We pick a city. We pick a partner, an identity, and then maybe we shed that identity because it's not working for us anymore. And we try on a new identity. Like for you, becoming a yoga teacher right now, that's a new identity that you're bringing into your life. And we have all these, infinity lives to live, but we can't live them all.
True that. Yeah. Do you feel like the first 28 years of your life, you're kind of shedding it, or you're just finding a new way to look at it?
The first 28 years of my life?
Before yoga?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that we can ever completely shed it. Our experiences they definitely shape us in a lot of ways, but looking back at me at 28 and me now about to turn 48, it's pretty hard to connect to who that woman was. And, I feel for her. I feel empathy for her and maybe a little pity for her. But mostly compassion. And I, there's a part in the book actually where they're in teacher training and Devin's character is doing something very similar to what I did when I kind of was sort of working through some of this stuff. Was she talked to her young self and was just like, hang in there and you're going to change your mind about a lot of things and it's not going to be this way forever, kind of thing. So that's the gift of aging, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, one of the things that I'm finding is not so great about aging. See, I'm so positive. I'm going to turn it like totally in the other direction. Yeah, but now that I'm becoming so physically involved in martial arts and yoga, and I'm 27. I'm not old, but I'm not young like I was when I was a teenager. Like it didn't matter what I did. I wouldn't feel it too hard the next day. And now like knees get swollen, wrists hurt if I'm doing too many arm balances, things like that. And you started yoga at about the time like you were my age. So I'm wondering if maybe your body wasn't as vulnerable as mine is at this point, but how treating your body well in regards to pushing yourself physically, how you kind of developed your attitude around that.
I love this question. Actually, it's something I think about a lot. I didn't have any problems, but I also was extraordinarily flexible, just born that way, hypermobile in certain areas of my body. So a lot of the yoga postures came really easy to me, which gave me the very false notion that I was quote unquote good at yoga. Like it just came naturally to me. And as time has gone on, and luckily for me, it's really only been over the last few years, starting to really feel it in my joints. So you have a choice. You either back off and respect the information that your body is sharing with you, or you push past it and suffer any consequences that potentially could come your way. So that's a decision. I'm actually reading a book right now called Hell Bent. I can't think of the guy's name, but it's called Hell Bent, and it was his experience as a Bikram yoga practitioner. And the idea behind it was to constantly physically push your body past its boundaries. And then he adds in a whole bunch of like medical background and scientific evidence to show that this actually can be really healing in certain ways. But he wraps it around towards the end of the book that, some of the concepts really resonated with him and some did not. And I guess that's kind of all. So same with yoga. Some of the pushes to physically test your body still resonate with me when it comes from a position of strengthening. When it comes from a position of pushing my joints past the normal range of motion, those I now ignore.
Yeah, I've sort of brought my mind around it. I've found the times that I'm pushing myself are times when I've gone into class and I've decided I'm going to try to be more playful with my practice today, without forgetting that safety is something I got to start thinking about.
Right.
Yeah. So without really thinking about like, is this making me stronger? It's just like, is this fun?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's something to be said for fun. I mean, I have definitely been a little on the critical side over the last couple of years of, what a lot of people might refer to as like the fancy poses, the party poses, the most Instagrammable of the yoga poses. And I certainly see a lot of value in those poses. However, I don't see them as more valuable than a posture that can really help you strengthen and that lets those little subtle tiny nuances in the body speak up a little louder and allow you to see their value too. Like I do think that maybe not just in yoga, but in everything, we have this sense of like wanting to feel as much sensation as we possibly can. We want grand movements, and there is so much beauty and so much value in the gentler sensations as well and feelings.
Yeah. And those are the ones that I struggle with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Because my ability to focus is limited. It's gotten better with yoga, but still like, do I have to child's pose right now?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That sort of thing.
I think a lot of people feel that way. I definitely can relate to that statement. It's I've asked in class before, like, who here just feels like they really are good at concentration? And concentration is the sixth limb of yoga, is learning how to focus and really concentrate. So I agree. That's why I think I love being in yoga class so much. It's the one time of the day I feel like I can really focus, and then the rest of the time I'm like a pigeon. And if anything shiny shows up, I'm in trouble.
Yeah, well, and that's kind of why people feel better afterward, isn't it?
I think so.
Because they kind of stop their thought loop once they get in there.
I think for some, yes. Like I've long since abandoned trying to guess what it is for individual people. I think everyone has their own specific reasons. But yes, I think people want to feel, but they also want to decrease the noise, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it feels good. All right. Well, I promised myself that I was going to try to keep this about your writing as much as I could.
Cool.
But, if we're talking about writing, we're talking about your inner life and yoga.
Yeah.
So, yeah. But what's your routine like since you have kind of a carousel of different things that you're doing? Do you write at the same time every day? Do you only write on certain days? Do you write only when you feel inspired? Force yourself to write when you don't feel inspired? What does that part of your life look like in your day to day?
It's different every day, just like my schedule is different every day. So it depends on my schedule. It depends on how focused I'm able to be. It depends on if my partner and his daughters are not at home and I have quiet. Depends on my time. So it's just too dependent on every single thing. And I have deadlines because I write for a variety of different people. So when I have a deadline, it doesn't matter if I'm in the mood to write or not. And actually, I'm the kind of person who needs deadlines. Deadlines work really well for me, which is why it took me 5 years to write Yoga Train, because I put it down for like a year and a half and then I'd pick it back up and put it back down. And the only deadlines were self-imposed. So it really just depends. But there are those mornings where I wake up and I just have an idea and I can't wait to get going on it. And typically once I get going, I can get in the zone pretty quickly, but I have trouble pushing myself to go there probably every day. I have to really sit myself down, and sometimes I don't. Sometimes I don't have the discipline to do it. But when I have to, I can always get it done. I can always meet a deadline. So I think you just have to go with your natural rhythms. I am a morning person. I am at my best early morning. My partner Jason always cracks up. He's like, you wake up like ready to take the SATs. And that is definitely when I'm at my best. And at night, I can barely focus on what you're saying. Like I need to be in bed on it like an earlier time. I need a lot of quiet at night because as talkative as I am, I'm really an introvert. So your question is tough because for anyone out there listening who's a writer, it's going to be 100% dependent on you specifically and what your rhythms are and what work for you. I do well with other people. Like when I have writing partners, not that we write together, but we just sit at the same space and hold each other accountable for being somewhere at a certain time. That has definitely gone well for me in the past. So you just kind of got to trial and error it and figure out what really works best for you if you really do want to develop I don't even want to call it a discipline of writing, but the habit of writing.
Got it. Well, I did want to ask this to you as the next question was, how did you find your deadlines? How did you find a way to work that into it and find people who are going to hold you accountable for it? But what I actually want to ask you first is, what did it look like for you before you had figured it out during the trial and error phase of figuring out how do you work on your own?
What did it look like for me then? At the beginning, I used to just go to coffee shops and sit and write because I found that if I was at home, I would get too easily distracted with other things that I could be doing. So I put myself in environments where I knew that I kind of had to focus. Otherwise, it'd be obvious that I was fucking around. Yeah, that's where I started with it.
That's exactly what I do now.
Is it? Yeah. So you found something that works for you.
Kinda.
In Atlanta, I had a writing partner, Hetty, and we met Monday, Wednesday, Friday mornings at 6:30 to 8:30. So that was 6 dedicated hours out of the week. And we didn't talk. We were really good about it. And I remember a couple of times I tried to talk. She's like, call me later.
Shut up.
Yeah. Shut up. But you definitely, can find resources like that. Ohio Writers Association has a really great novel writing course. And I had already written the novel, but I knew it needed so much work that it was just like a very, very rough first draft. So I took that to refine it. Do you know that it had literally never occurred to me to write an outline?
I guess it could. I don't really know how many people write with outlines.
I think a lot of people write with outlines.
Yeah, that's like a thing that you should be doing.
And you can revise your outline, but giving yourself a skeleton, like a foundation to work from. And it seriously had never even crossed my mind. They're like, yeah, you got to come up with an outline. And then that really did help me change the novel, hopefully for the better. I did make a decision in writing my novel. And some people have pulled it off flawlessly, and I don't know whether I did or not, because I've gotten both positive and negative feedback on it. But in the middle of the novel, I change narrators. Devin has a best friend in the novel named Ruby. And I give Ruby's point of view for, a pretty decent section in the middle of the book. And then I switch back to Devin. And some people really like that for the sake of, you hear from one person's point of view.
Yeah.
And then to get another person's point of view gives you another insight into that main character from someone else's eyes. They did that really, really well in the book The Help by Kathleen. I think it's Sprocket is her last name. Do you remember the book The Help? It was a movie.
I know the movie. I didn't realize it was a book.
Oh, yeah. And she's given some really great interviews. Like she was rejected by like 60 different publishers. And then when she found one, she was told to revise. But she changes narrators. I believe there's 3 or 4 narrators in her book. And it's absolutely incredible the way she does it. But she's also a highly skilled writer, and I'm not.
I mean, one of the writers who I almost always find a book by him to read is Stephen King, and he does that constantly. Like, it doesn't seem like such a radical idea to me.
Well, again, they pull it off really well. You have to be able to execute that well. And, this is the other thing, talking about non-attachment again, and writing, that is a huge thing, because I wrote this novel. I decided to just self-publish it on Amazon. I did try with a couple publishers, even got a little bit of interest, but then I thought, I just want control over this. So I'm just going to do this and see what happens. And I've gotten mostly really good reviews, but I got one review where the reviewer started her sentence with, "Life is precious. Do not waste 1 second of yours reading this novel." And she just trashed me for making that choice. So you have to remember that, like, don't get too tripped up by the positive reviews. Don't get too tripped up by the negative reviews.
Don't take anything personally.
Don't take anything personally, but, try to learn from it. Like, I really did sit with some of her feedback and try to think like, okay, well, that was pretty harsh. I can imagine worse things to read, but I did try to sit with some of her suggestions, and maybe, learn from those. But you also just kind of got to take things in stride. And the same thing happens when you put yourself out there as a guitar teacher, which is what you do, or a yoga teacher. You're going to subject yourself to both praise and criticism. And if you're going to live life like that, which most of us do on some level, you just got to be able to roll with it.
Yeah. Well, you can't be everything to everybody.
You can't be most things to most people.
Yeah. You can be a few of the things that some of the people who are kind of happy with you were looking for. Is what I aim for.
Aim for mediocrity.
Yeah.
Always just right above mediocrity.
But no, I really get that. All right. But so when you started finding more structure in writing for other people who were giving you deadlines, how did you go about finding those situations?
Seek them out. The answer is already no if you never ask the question. So if I had a good idea for a pitch, and I got really lucky, like a little spoiled, like my very first pitch I ever made to a publication was accepted. And then I got a little cocky, and then, I'd get feedback from them on like, wow, you really missed the mark on this piece. And then, again, it's like praise and criticism. So one of the articles that I have written that I've reread a few times just because the concepts are things that mean a lot to me is feedback. And so as a writer, you're going to get all kinds of feedback. Well, you're going to get all kinds of feedback in a million ways, but let's just focus on writing for now. So finding people who will give you real feedback, ask you questions, maybe not be a jerk about it, but ask you questions about like, why did you make this choice? Like maybe if I had one of my readers say, I did not get much from you switching narrators. That did not give me the insight that I would have really hoped to get from your main character. Maybe I would have thought with that a little bit. Maybe I would have made some revisions based on that. So looking at all feedback as worthwhile pieces of information to consider. And for some, taking constructive criticism is harder. For some, taking positive feedback is harder. It really goes both ways. But just being really open to all feedback, not letting it completely define you, but also not dismissing it right away at least, and mull it over, and then perhaps make changes on it or dismiss it. Feedback, yo.
Feedback. Yeah, I pretty much every interview that I've ever had up until I became a musician was, how do you feel? How do you deal with criticism? Like, oh, if it's constructive, I'm really excited about it. No, I'm dying inside, man.
Right.
I'm out in the world. I'm already dealing with all of this imposter syndrome. Like, Don't tell me that. But no, I feel that because having people tell me what I could be doing better has really been the biggest reason that I've gotten better, not because I've intentionally wanted to be something.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that relying too much on praise, words of affirmation is one of the 5 love languages in that famous book, The 5 Love Languages by, I think it's Gary Coleman. Is it? No, not Gary Coleman. That's an actor. I forget the guy's name. Gary Chapman. That's who it is.
Oh.
And so words of affirmation, are wonderful, but when you're too reliant on them and you need that, and then you can't handle it, when someone is telling you,
well, that's just kind of a way of being fragile.
It's a way of being fragile. And it's definitely a pathway towards entitlement, like to feel that you need to be told that you can probably walk on water if you try hard enough. It's going to set each one of us up for some very unrealistic expectations. I die inside too when I get negative feedback.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, it's a short death, hopefully at this point, and recover. Get back up and try to learn from it. But yeah, nobody loves being told, ooh, that sucked. That doesn't feel good. But for me, I went to advertising school in Atlanta. It was a school called the Creative Circus. And I went there for the copywriting program. And day one, they tell you, you are not allowed to get defensive. You are not allowed to defend your work, because if you are writing ads and they are in a magazine or on TV or on the radio or a billboard, you're not going to be able to stand there and explain to people what the hell you were trying to convey. So we're giving you the feedback as if we were readers and you're not even in the room. You just got to take it in and then decide what changes you're going to make and what you're not going to do. And that really was a huge turning point in my life, is realizing like, oh yeah, being defensive sucks. Nobody likes dealing with a defensive person, and I don't want to be one anymore. Doesn't mean I'm never defensive, but it's definitely something that all of us can practice, is being less defensive and more open to all varieties of feedback, just as being helpful, potentially helpful.
Yeah. One of the things that you say in class a lot that I love is, just tell people the decision you made and don't feel any need to explain it.
Yeah. Fuck them. Just kidding.
Yeah. Seriously, fuck them, right?
Well,
we're kind of busy here.
Exhausting. It gets exhausting feeling
for everybody, though.
For everyone. One of my biggest pet peeves, and I used to do this all the time. I remember if I had to call in sick to work when I was in my 20s, I would freak out. I would feel like, oh my God, I've got to give them this huge story, or they're going to think I'm faking it. And I don't want them to think I don't take my job seriously. So I would like create this giant thing. And I didn't understand at the time the other person's like, shut up. I don't care. Fine. The world is going to turn without you. So there is a part of us feeling like we need to over-explain ourselves that also insists on some self-importance. Like, it's okay. Mm-hmm. It's fine that you're late. We've all managed to still be able to move on with our lives, even though you were not in the room. So that's sort of where it kind of clicked for me. It was like, yeah, I don't want to insist on myself that way. So I might say, I'm sorry, I'm late. Or I might say, forgive me, I forgot about our appointment. But, doesn't mean that there's never explanation. I think the first time I had to cancel this podcast on you, I did say to you, I have an opportunity to work with a private client. I got to make money, so every now and then I feel like it's sort of, you want that other person to know you value their time, and you want them to know I'm not canceling on you because I'm flaky. There's a legit reason, but you got to pick and choose how often you explain yourself.
It was like, Nathan, I really have to bolster myself to look at your face for so long.
Nathan, I'm going to endure this podcast with you. I guess I can possibly give you my precious time.
I have to save up for enough vodka to make it through this whole hour.
In fact, you're going to have to provide that.
Hey, I offered a drink, but...
That's true. I'm good with my water.
No, it was 11 in the morning. It's okay.
True.
Yeah.
If it had been noon, that'd be a whole other story.
Right. But yeah... providing explanations, it's definitely a form of defensiveness. Kind of have to learn not to do it. I feel like everybody finds their level of, I'll put it another way. People figure out what they don't have to give a shit about.
Well, that's that famous book now by Mark Manson, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck.
Yeah.
Right. And that's the whole idea. You only have so many fucks to give. And so if you care enough about something, yes, that's on your list. That's your short list of fucks to give.
This has come up a couple of times in the podcast, actually. My second interview I did with my friend Chris, who's a software engineer and a saxophone player.
Oh, cool.
And, yeah, he's great. And really practice-minded. He has a lot of really cool interests. And one thing that he has a lot of things that he needs to practice. And the way he put it is like, there's only so many fucks I can give in a day. The fuck allocation. It's like, how many can I put toward what?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to explaining ourselves, I'm going to apply that to writing. When you're writing, there are explanation is required, but the way you go about that explanation, like how do you offer that explanation? Do you tell a story from somebody's past? Do you create context and then put them in a situation where they're not explaining to that other person, but you as the reader know why they did what they did, but you know that the other character they're dealing with doesn't. So there's always all these choices about when do you explain and when do you not. Like sometimes it is required, but most of the time, no.
Yeah. And actually the best example of that in writing that I can think of off the top of my head would be, I read Stephen King's On Writing.
Me too.
And great book. Not good to read while you're writing, but good to read and then just kind of absorb that as you will over time, but not over describing settings. And a lot of that plays into respect your reader to have enough imagination to fill in the blanks. And don't exhaust them with all of these explanations of what people were wearing and what the bar looked like and what's on the window and this, that, the other, which is, I love Game of Thrones. I love the TV show.
Me too.
I've tried to read the book and I can't get past the first couple of chapters because it's exhausting.
I had the exact same reaction. And listening to you talk about that book by Stephen King, which I've also read, and that also resonated with me. And I read that right after I had submitted Yoga Train to Divergent Books. And, the man who dealt with me was lovely. I mean, he didn't have to give me the time of day. He was wonderful. But his feedback to me was, I love the story, great character development, but there is not enough narrative sinew was his terminology. So not enough narrative muscle to back this up. He's like, you really don't describe the scenes very well. And so, again, everything is about opinion. Stephen King is a master. If you read his stuff, there is enough description. If you think back on a Pet Cemetery, and he's talking about the little boy Gage that gets killed by the truck. And that's where the whole story kind of starts to go in a very crazy direction. If you've never read it, you should read it. But Gage's red jacket and the way he describes it just once. And then it's like what you see when you are picturing this child as he comes up again and again in the story. So you have to offer some contextual narrative, but knowing that fine line between what's enough and what's not enough. So I have found that is definitely something I am lacking as a writer and would like to get better at, where Stephen is just perfect. But you have to offer something, and he's right. And then you read the Game of Thrones books or other books where you're just like, oh God, this description goes on for 6 pages.
Oh,
like,
no,
I'm
not
done.
another character.
Right.
Like, I just got done with the first 2.
Right.
Yeah.
I got it. She's got one blue eye and one green eye with a speck of brown. Like, you don't have to mention that every single time.
Yeah. How many mistakes do you feel like you've had to unlearn since you started doing this? Are there a lot?
There's not a number high enough.
No?
No. I feel like every time I reread anything I've written, even the article I submitted yesterday, I thought to myself, did I write that? Like, I'm not even feeling my voice in that. Like, who was I yesterday that I wrote that? Because I can't even connect to it. So, okay, there you go. There's a mistake. I didn't used to really carefully enough read over my drafts before submitting them. And that is definitely a mistake that I'm pretty good about now, is reading it over, asking someone if it really matters to me. Because we know when you put yourself out there, you publish things, that is speaking for you. That's representative of you. And you can't take those things back. You can always go in and say, I have changed my mind since I wrote this piece. And that I'd be more than happy to do. But you still have to respect yourself and not come across like a pretentious asshole or a know-it-all or someone who is not at least being respectful enough to ask questions, but then also hold space for other opinions. Mm-hmm. And there's some stuff I've written in the past that I just thought, oh, I can't stand you.
Yeah. And that's something that I feel like anybody who starts just creating anything has to get at peace with. Like, hey, you're not going to like yourself in 10 years, but learn to be okay with that now.
Yeah.
Yeah. My, the last interview I did was with my old boss. He's a songwriter, and he was talking about, like, I've never intentionally thrown out an idea. There's always recordings. There's always, something I've written down to show for it. And I was like, how often do you ever use like one of the old good ideas? And he's like, absolutely never. But he'd like listen. He said he had a big trip and he listened to all of these tapes, 16 hours. And it's like a lot of it, just not good song ideas. A lot of it was about things in my life that I cared about then, I just wouldn't care about now. But it's interesting to see how toward the end of it, I was starting to relate more to what I was saying. So it's a process. You can't just look at it as like, what is the final product going to look like the first time or even the 100th time?
Well, right. Because one idea, even if it's a bad one, may lead you to that good idea. I had a really bad idea that I tried to take far too far. And it was a big learning experience for me. I got this idea about like designing a unisex messenger bag. And I wanted to call the bag message. Like I wanted to call the bag itself message. And I wanted there to be a message hidden inside the bag somewhere on the bottom part of the bag, like somewhere not obvious, but that the shape of the bag would be so obvious to anyone who would see somebody else carrying one that it would start conversations between people. So if I saw you carrying this bag and I'd say, oh, that's a message bag. And I'd walk up and I'd say, what's your message? And then it could start this like incredible connection between you and I that would never have happened otherwise. Very lofty idea. I got it after reading Blake Mycosky's book, the guy who started Tom's, the shoe company.
Yeah.
His book is called Start Something That Matters. And I was like on fire after I read that book. And so I came up with this idea and then I pitched it to the Ohio Corrections Facility. My hope was that maybe I could involve the prison system in manufacturing the bags there and, you know, bring business that way because there's grants and things that work with that. And then also like meet people and get their stories and then maybe even connect with them and try to help with getting people hired once they left prison. So it's like, it turned into this whole thing. Like, how can I support people in the prison system and support them once they get out by making these connections? And so they ended up rejecting my idea because when I went back in for round 2, they asked me all kinds of questions, like fiscal questions and revenues and, you know, how much money this would take. I just had no idea. I had none of the answers. So that's another mistake. I still repeat, but maybe not quite as often, is not doing enough homework, not doing enough research before moving in the direction of an idea, just getting excited and jumping in with both feet first without spending some time really developing it.
Looking at it.
Yeah. Exactly. Because that was really embarrassing. It really was. It was a little humiliating, to be honest with you. And so my heart was in the right place, but I had just simply not done the work.
Man. Yeah. Well, that's a good lesson learned.
Yeah.
But actually the research of putting these kinds of projects together is kind of the fun part for a lot of people.
For some. For others, they just love to create the idea like I do. And then want somebody else to figure out the money part of things and the logistics of it. You know, like when you and I were talking about the podcast, you were saying how much you love to do the technical side of it. And I think my response was, ew. So different things.
No, you didn't say that, but it was the look in your eye.
You read it. You saw it. Yeah. So, yeah. Mistakes, so many of them, too many to learn, too many to count. But I guess just the hope is that you learn from some of your mistakes, and maybe the bigger the mistake, the
more you can get out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
The more rock bottom you hit, the more likely it is you'll learn from it. I don't know.
Yeah, I got to say that every like really big major bad thing that's happened in my life has always been like, okay, well, a new direction now. It's almost the only thing you can do.
Is it, or is it that you can just refine and fine tune? Like, do you always have to go another direction, or is it a matter of just making a different choice within the same direction sometimes?
Yeah, kind of more that, I would say. But if it's really absolutely not working, like probably the big career change that I had to make, I didn't stick with mine for that long, but I went through college, graduated with accounting, got out, was an auditor for about a year, and then was like, absolutely not this.
Right.
Like everything about this is just not me. And the music thing is tugging at the back of my mind. So obviously that. But then there are other things where you were just like, I saw where I made a mistake in that process, and I'm just going to look out for it next time.
Sure. That makes sense. There's both. There's room for both. There's a hell yes and a hell no category. And you landed on hell no with being an auditor.
Absolutely.
And great. You would never have known had you not at least given it a shot.
Yeah, no, I'm happy for the experience because now I know X, Y, and Z about like what's going to be good for the way that I work.
Right.
Yeah.
And you may change your mind 1,000 more times in this life. You know, you are 27 and you got a lot of years left ahead of you, hopefully. So it's nice to know that there will be room to constantly change our minds and that we're not locked in to many things. You have a child, you're pretty much locked into that, right?
Yeah.
But most things in life...
Done a decent job avoiding that so far.
But most things in life we're not locked into. And we're lucky for that. Incredibly, incredibly lucky that we can change our minds. We can say, this career is not for me. This significant other is just not the right person for me, or I'm not the right person for him or her. This friendship is no longer working. This city is no longer where I want to live. So we're very fortunate that we can make these different choices and then get different energy and different versions of ourselves will come out.
Yeah.
Right?
At this point in your life, because it sounds like you've made so many big decisions and big changes, do you think there's a lot of refining left to do?
Hell yes.
Yeah.
So much. I have been with my partner, Jason, for 5 years. I live with him and his 2 daughters live with us 50% of the time. And they're phenomenal. 15 and 12, coming up on 16 and 13. And they're, in my opinion, very atypical teenagers. They're really, I think, very exceptional girls. But I am constantly learning how little I know about how to sort of be an influencer in a child's life, because this is all new to me. I've only been in their, so I've been with their dad for 5 years, really been significantly in their life for 4, and incessantly revising my approach to things or my attitude about things. So I feel like I hope that will be forever. I hope that that will never, ever cease.
Yeah, I kind of said something really similar in one of the other interviews. Just like, yeah, they asked about perfection. And I was like, I really hope I never get there because I like the process.
I can promise you, Nate, you won't. And neither will I.
All right,
And
cool,
neither one of us.
It's pretty obvious to most people. Just want to see. Yeah, we're kind of coming up on the end of the hour.
Cool.
Is there any lofty, inspiring message that you want to leave with the listeners?
Did I not just say so many fabulous things, you guys?
You did. It's really just a laundry list of like everything you need to know.
Yeah.
But I mean, anything else, or you want to reiterate?
Just how important self-awareness is. As you and I were talking, Nate, I caught myself laughing after things that I would say because I recognize that as a habit when I'm not sure if people know that I'm joking. I will add in that little laugh at the end. And I'm just offering that up as a example of there's no shortage of need for the constant pursuit of more self-awareness and humility that comes along with it. And the opportunities are endless to have that presented. And it's just a matter of us taking advantage of them. Mm-hmm. So hopefully today is a day where all of us will just move a little bit more in the direction of wanting to be more self-aware and wanting to be more humble versus the alternatives, I guess. And then some days, we'll be cocky assholes, and then something will knock us down and put us right back in that place of self-study and self-awareness and humility yet again.
Absolutely. All right. Thanks for that.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And if people wanted to see the cool things that you do and the cool things that you write.
Cool is a relative term, y'all. Yoga Train is available on Amazon, Kindle Unlimited. Nate says it's free if you have Kindle Unlimited. Otherwise, it's $5.99. And my last name is Falberg, Falberg. And then my website is iworkbarefoot.com. It's a yoga teacher resource with verbal cues and sequences and class themes and a blog. And that's really all I got.
All right.
Yeah.
Cool. It's enough for me.
Cool.
All right. Well, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. All right. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. Love you. Bye.